Thank you so much for that incredible welcome. This is amazing. Very excited to be here tonight. Not sure who that fellow is. It was many hairs ago, obviously. I'd always wondered what was in these fancy buildings down here at the end of Summit Avenue and stuff. And I joke, but 5 years ago, I wasn't even sure I was going to be in a house by the end of the year. And so to be inside is amazing. I didn't even have these clothes 5 days ago. So there's a lot of things that are new for me. These shoes are about 5 hours old, and it feels like it. Well, thank you. My name is Chris Shaw. I do run an organization called the Heart and Mind Connection, which is a nonprofit that I put together in 2017 after what was really a turnaround in my life. I grew up in New York City to showbiz parents, and I had the opportunity to understand what it was like to be around that partying lifestyle. Although the things that happen for kids sometimes in their life, you probably hear a lot of times, well, comedians, they usually do that because they had a hard upbringing. You know, well, maybe not Seinfeld, maybe, but I've found over the years that there is some truth to that we search for ways to cover up the things that are hard for us by making sure that we can help other people feel better. And when we talk about mental illness, it's often because it's very hard to understand sometimes even what we're dealing with. I was on the road for the good part of the last 30 years, most of it undiagnosed, through 2 marriages, not understanding why my moods would rapidly cycle between incredibly elated, and I mean elated to the point where my wife would be like, Chris, come down off the roof of the house at 2 a.m. with the rake yelling at the moon and no pants on. I have a pants aversion. That's a thing too. So, but then dipping into these incredible depressive lows where I would cry for no reason and not understand that, and the struggle that comes from the stigma that not only we recognize from society, but the stigma we put on ourselves, especially as men, especially people who might have served in the military. We develop a sense that I've got this. Don't worry about it. I can take care of this too. And it just wasn't true. It was what I would learn at 41 was bipolar disorder type 1 with psychotic features, and PTSD based on what they term ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, which is the term they use for trauma that children face before they're 18. It's a very simple test of 10 questions to say, have you experienced any of these things prior to being 18 years old? Abuse, neglect, homelessness, assault. I had 9 of the 10. The only one I didn't have was a parent incarcerated before the time I was 18. But he might have been. I don't know, because he had left. And when he left, even though most of the attention I got from him was negative, physical abuse, I was 7 when I had my first concussion. And then when he left at 10, I blamed myself, as far too often happens when we don't understand the adult situations that are going on that bring us to that point. I began skipping school. I was bullied. I took a train in New York City, where we lived, up to Central Park at 13 years old, where I would hide out. And for some reason, as a child growing up in New York City, I wanted to be a forest ranger. And And if you went in the middle of Central Park, even though you could see all the tall buildings all the way around the park, it still felt like I was out somewhere in the woods where I didn't have to deal with anybody else. And one of the last times I remembered leaving that park as a child, I was encountered by someone. And we all know about the term fight or flight and what that means and how that's triggered in us very often. What a lot of people don't know is when we talk about mental illness, very often flight can mean an internal flight into ourselves, to where we repress things and put them away because our brain just cannot deal with the amount of emotional trauma that it's being faced with. I remembered heading out of the park to take the subway home before my mom would get home, and I remember somebody coming up to me and saying, "Hey kid, give me your money." And I was like, "I'm 13, I don't have any money." And much like a pinball machine that you would shake, our brain, when faced with incredible amounts of trauma, will do just that, tilt. Game over. Ball rolls down. We're going to take this, we're going to tuck this down here in the back in this subconscious, and we're going to keep it back there, and maybe we'll come out at another point later on in your life, and maybe we won't, but maybe things will happen that will trigger you to feel as if that tragedy, that trauma was happening again and again and again, but you won't understand what it was because I'm not going to let you remember that part of it. But the actions that will come out, the behaviors that you'll display, the emotions that you'll constantly be feeling that you don't understand will change the way you live your life. The last thing I remembered after that was a hand over my mouth and grabbing my arm. And then I don't know the amount of time, but the next thing I remember was running out of the park, climbing over the wall onto Park Avenue and asking this couple to pretend they were my parents because someone was after me. And they walked me to the subway, and I took the subway home, and I blamed myself because I was not supposed to be where I was. So it must have been my own fault that I had been sexually assaulted. And at 13 years old, my brain took my emotional growth and it stopped it right there. And I grew physically and I grew intellectually, but any emotional exchange I would have with my siblings, with my parents, with someone I was dating, I would resort back to this 12-year-old, almost a child in the grocery store who didn't get what he wanted, throwing themselves down on the floor in a fit. And that's attractive when you're dating, isn't it, ladies? My mom got remarried. I moved from Lower Town, Manhattan. We lived down near Chinatown, Little Italy, and Greenwich Village. We moved to Stillwater, Minnesota as I went into high school. Right? Might as well have been the moon. I was like, look at all the white people. I was like, where's everyone else? And they go, no, this is it. I said, well, what do you guys do for fun here? And they were like, well, we tip cows and we drink. And I'm from New York, and I thought, tip cows? I mean, I'm only 16. How much do you tip a good cow? 20%? 30%? But the drinking, first time after a football game, friends brought me out to this field party north of Stillwater, and I had a taste of this metal container of beer, and not regular beer, mind you, the champagne of beers. Miller High Life, that's right. But 2 or 3 glasses of that stuff, and all of a sudden, all these feelings in my mind, all this hate and shame and guilt and self-loathing began to fall away. And I was like, oh my God, I found my medication. And we laugh, but you don't know how many times over the last year when I have gone out and done mental health first aid training with police departments and EMS departments and corrections officers who have the highest rate of suicide of any first responders, how they will talk about that they don't know anything else except to numb that pain because it's seen as a weakness. In 2015, when I could not take that pain anymore after the loss of 2 marriages, where I couldn't connect with my children, where I had just gotten my 5th DWI and my second car taken away from me for an alcohol offense, it was at a point where I no longer had 3 very important things in my life. And I'm going to ask you to think about this as you go forward in your lives and how, if you have these, how you can help someone else find these. The first thing was connection. If anybody in here like me has become a fan of Brené Brown, you know her songs about connection. It's what we need as humans. We crave recognition, attention, love, touch. I was isolating. It wasn't there. The second thing that was missing for me at that point in my life was purpose. I couldn't get to the one job that I loved, was making other people laugh. And when that was taken away from me, that coping mechanism of at least I could help make other people feel a little better, there was really no purpose I could find to stay around. And the third thing, as cliche as it sounds, because it gets thrown around way too frequently and misused, kind of like love. You know how people will say, oh, honey, I love you. Chicken, I love chicken. Do you love me more than chicken? It's hard. But the word is hope. And again, it might sound cliche, but what it meant for me at the height of a psychotic episode, after I'd finished off every last bit of alcohol and drugs that were in my apartment, the only thing I could see that was coming down the line for me was returning to jail, was no more connection, no purpose. And I had no hope in that moment that I would ever feel any better than I did right then. And ladies and gentlemen, when somebody gets to that point in their life where there is not a hope that things can get better, this is when we start to lose people on a grand scale. We're facing a virus. Worried about the numbers we'll lose. Let me give you some numbers before we leave. In 2018, in the United States, there were 16,322 murders. Death by another person intentional. In 2018, in the United States, there were just over 48,000 suicides. There are people everywhere who need to know that you care. Because the thing that ran through my head for more than 30 years was this script that told me these two things. One, nobody knows what I'm going through. And nobody would care if they did. Human connection. Helping someone find some level of purpose, whether they're a 5-year-old child or a 95-year-old widowed retiree. and hope that as bad as things feel today, tomorrow has the chance to be better and for redemption. This was not nearly as funny as you had hoped a comedian would be. But hopefully it left you wanting more. I'm so proud to be here. I hope there's a bit of my message that you've been able to take with you today. I'll hang around as long as you'd like to chat more later. Thank you for having me out. Good night.